On the 6th of February, 2011, something extraordinary happened in the depths of the internet that would forever change how we understand digital commerce, privacy, and the boundaries between freedom and criminality. This was the day that money first began flowing through a revolutionary online marketplace called Silk Road, marking the beginning of what would become the most sophisticated criminal enterprise the digital world had ever witnessed. The story begins, however, several months earlier, in the summer of 2010, when a young man named Ross William Ulbricht sat in his modest apartment, consumed by libertarian ideals and a vision of economic freedom that would ultimately consume him. Born on March 27, 1984, in Austin, Texas, Ross had grown up in a world that was rapidly digitizing, where the internet represented infinite possibilities and the promise of liberation from traditional constraints. Ulbricht wasn't your typical criminal mastermind. He was an educated man with degrees in physics and materials science, someone who had spent years contemplating the nature of freedom, economics, and human interaction. His transformation from an earnest graduate student to the architect of the dark web's most notorious marketplace is a tale that reads like a modern tragedy, complete with hubris, ambition, and an inevitable fall from grace. The conception of Silk Road emerged from Ulbricht's deep philosophical convictions about personal liberty and free market economics. He believed passionately that individuals should have the right to make their own choices about what they consumed, bought, and sold without government interference. This wasn't merely an abstract principle for him. It was a driving force that would lead him to create something unprecedented in the annals of digital commerce. Throughout the latter half of 2010, Ulbricht worked tirelessly to bring his vision to life. He spent countless hours learning about the Tor network, understanding Bitcoin's revolutionary potential, and designing what would become the world's first truly anonymous online marketplace. The technical challenges were immense. He needed to create a platform that could facilitate secure transactions while maintaining the complete anonymity of both buyers and sellers. This required mastering complex encryption technologies, understanding the intricacies of cryptocurrency, and developing sophisticated systems for dispute resolution and quality control. The name Silk Road was carefully chosen, evoking the historical network of trade routes that connected East and West during the Han Dynasty, facilitating commerce across vast distances and diverse cultures. Ulbricht saw his digital marketplace as a modern incarnation of this ancient trading network, a place where geographical boundaries dissolved and commerce could flow freely across traditional barriers. When Silk Road officially launched in February 2011, it represented a quantum leap in online criminal enterprise. Unlike previous illegal marketplaces that operated on the regular internet and were vulnerable to law enforcement, Silk Road existed entirely within the Tor network, accessible only through specialized software that anonymized users' locations and identities. Transactions were conducted exclusively in Bitcoin, a digital currency that was still in its infancy, but offered the promise of truly anonymous financial exchange. Ulbricht's journal entries from this period, which would later be used as evidence against him, reveal his excitement and nervousness about what he had created. He wrote about receiving his first signups just days after launch, and then his first message. These early interactions filled him with a mixture of pride and trepidation. He was witnessing his philosophical vision taking concrete form, but he was also stepping irrevocably into the world of serious criminality. The marketplace Ulbricht created was remarkably sophisticated. It featured user ratings and reviews, dispute resolution systems, and a professional-looking interface that made illegal drug purchases feel almost mundane. Vendors could create detailed profiles, customers could leave feedback, and the entire system operated with a level of customer service that put many legitimate businesses to shame. This attention to user experience would prove to be one of Silk Road's greatest strengths, and paradoxically, one of the key factors that would eventually lead to its downfall. To operate this marketplace, Ulbricht adopted the pseudonym Dread Pirate Roberts, a reference to the character from The Princess Bride, who was more legend than man, a title passed down through generations rather than the identity of a single individual. This choice revealed something profound about Ulbricht's psychology. He wasn't just creating a business, he was creating a persona, a digital mythology that would allow him to transcend his ordinary existence as Ross Ulbricht and become something larger and more significant. As Dread Pirate Roberts, Ulbricht cultivated an image of principled leadership. He wasn't just facilitating drug sales, he was championing a cause. He regularly posted philosophical treatises on the site about the nature of freedom, the evils of prohibition, and the moral imperative to resist unjust laws. These writings revealed a man who genuinely believed he was fighting for something greater than personal profit, even as his marketplace generated enormous revenues from activities that destroyed lives and communities. The growth of Silk Road throughout 2011 and 2012 was meteoric. What began as a small experiment quickly evolved into a sprawling criminal enterprise that attracted users from around the world. The marketplace offered an astonishing variety of illegal goods and services. By September 23, 2013, law enforcement would document that Silk Road contained thousands of listings across multiple categories, 159 listings under services, most offering computer hacking services, 801 listings under digital goods, and thousands more under drug-related categories including cannabis, dissociatives, ecstasy, intoxicants, opioids, precursors, prescription, psychedelics, and stimulants. The scale of commerce flowing through Silk Road was staggering. Conservative estimates suggest that during its operational period from January 2011 to October 2013, the marketplace facilitated transactions worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Some estimates put the total volume of commerce at over $1.2 billion, though the true figure remains disputed. What isn't disputed is that Silk Road represented the largest illegal marketplace in internet history, dwarfing any previous attempts at online criminal commerce. Ulbricht's role in this enterprise extended far beyond simple facilitation. As Dread Pirate Roberts, he was the ultimate authority on Silk Road, making decisions about vendor disputes, site policies, and strategic direction. He collected commissions on every transaction, typically ranging from 8 to 15% of the sale price. These commissions, combined with listing fees and other revenue streams, generated enormous personal wealth for Ulbricht. By the time of his arrest, investigators would discover that he had accumulated a Bitcoin fortune worth tens of millions of dollars. But running Silk Road required more than just technical expertise and business acumen. It demanded a level of operational security that would have challenged even experienced intelligence operatives. Ulbricht had to maintain multiple false identities, use sophisticated encryption techniques, and constantly adapt to evolving law enforcement techniques. The psychological pressure of living this double life was immense. He was simultaneously Ross Ulbricht, the thoughtful graduate student, and Dread Pirate Roberts, the shadowy kingpin of the dark web's most notorious marketplace. The challenges of maintaining operational security became increasingly complex as Silk Road grew. Ulbricht found himself dealing with increasingly sophisticated threats from multiple directions. Rival marketplaces emerged, trying to compete for his users and vendors. Scammers attempted to exploit his systems. Most dangerously, law enforcement agencies around the world began dedicating significant resources to identifying and dismantling his operation. From November 2011 to September 2013, law enforcement agents from multiple agencies conducted extensive undercover operations on Silk Road, making purchases and gathering intelligence about its operations. These investigations revealed not just the scope of illegal commerce on the platform, but also the sophisticated nature of its operations. Agents discovered that Silk Road wasn't just a simple marketplace. It was a complex ecosystem with its own economy, culture, and governance structures. The beginning of the end for Silk Road can actually be traced to a seemingly minor mistake that Ulbricht made in the early days of the site's operation. When he was first promoting Silk Road on various internet forums, he used the username Altoid to announce the new marketplace. This wasn't unusual. Many people use pseudonyms when discussing controversial topics online. However, in a moment of carelessness that would ultimately prove fatal, Ulbricht used the same Altoid username in a different context, asking for programming help on a coding forum. In that post, seeking to establish his credibility as a developer, he included his real email address, which contained his full name. This connection between Altoid and Ross Ulbricht would remain dormant for months, buried in the vast expanse of internet archives. But law enforcement agencies were methodically building their case, following digital breadcrumbs and analyzing communication patterns. When investigators finally made the connection between the Altoid post promoting Silk Road and the programming help request that revealed Ulbricht's identity, they had their first real breakthrough in the case. The investigation into Silk Road represented one of the most sophisticated law enforcement operations in internet history. Multiple agencies coordinated their efforts, including the FBI, DEA, IRS, and various international partners. They employed cutting-edge digital forensics techniques, conducted extensive surveillance operations, and developed new methods for tracking cryptocurrency transactions. The scale of resources dedicated to dismantling Silk Road reflected not just the site's criminal significance, but also its symbolic importance as a challenge to traditional law enforcement authority. Throughout 2012 and 2013, as law enforcement pressure intensified, Ulbricht found himself increasingly paranoid and isolated. The weight of maintaining his double life was taking a psychological toll. Journal entries from this period reveal a man struggling with the moral implications of his actions, even as he remained committed to his philosophical principles. He wrote about feeling trapped by the success of his creation, unable to step away from something that had grown far beyond his original vision. The operational challenges of running Silk Road also escalated dramatically during this period. Ulbricht had to deal with increasingly sophisticated attacks from both criminals and law enforcement. He was forced to constantly upgrade his security measures, change operational procedures, and adapt to new threats. The stress of this constant vigilance, combined with the isolation required to maintain his anonymity, pushed him to his psychological limits. As 2013 progressed, several events signaled that Ulbricht's carefully constructed digital empire was beginning to crumble. Law enforcement agencies had successfully infiltrated various aspects of the Silk Road operation, gathering evidence and building comprehensive cases against key participants. International cooperation was increasing, making it harder for Ulbricht to find safe havens for his operations. Most ominously, investigators were closing in on his real identity through a combination of digital forensics and traditional investigative techniques. The final chapter of the Silk Road story began to unfold in the early fall of 2013. By this time, federal investigators had accumulated substantial evidence pointing to Ulbricht as the mastermind behind Dread Pirate Roberts. They had traced cryptocurrency transactions, analyzed communication patterns, and identified numerous connections between Ulbricht's legitimate activities and his criminal enterprise. The case against him was becoming overwhelming, but they still needed to catch him in the act of operating the site to ensure a successful prosecution. The trap was set with meticulous precision. On October 1, 2013, Department of Homeland Security agent Jared Deryegiayan positioned himself strategically near the Glen Park Library, a branch of the San Francisco Public Library where Ulbricht frequently worked. The choice of location was deliberate. Public libraries offered free internet access and the kind of anonymity that someone like Ulbricht would value. Deryegiayan used a secure chat application to contact Dread Pirate Roberts, asking him to check on a flagged message from a Silk Road user. This communication was part of an elaborate sting operation designed to confirm that Ulbricht was indeed Dread Pirate Roberts and to catch him actively administering the site. The timing had to be perfect. Investigators needed to arrest him while he was logged into Silk Road's administrative systems, providing irrefutable evidence of his role in the operation. At approximately 3:15 p.m. on October 1, 2013, as Ulbricht sat at a computer terminal in the Glen Park Library, federal agents moved in to make the arrest that would end one of the most significant criminal enterprises in internet history. The operation was choreographed with military precision. As Ulbricht worked on his laptop, completely absorbed in managing his digital empire, he had no idea that his every move was being monitored by law enforcement agents positioned throughout the library. The arrest itself was a masterpiece of timing and coordination. Agents had to ensure that they captured Ulbricht while he was actively logged into the Silk Road administrative systems, providing definitive proof of his identity as Dread Pirate Roberts. As he sat focused on his screen, responding to the fabricated emergency message that agents had sent him, Federal officers surrounded his table and placed him under arrest. The moment of Ulbricht's capture marked the end of an era in digital crime. His laptop, still open and logged into Silk Road's back-end systems, provided investigators with a treasure trove of evidence that would prove instrumental in his prosecution. The device contained detailed records of transactions, communications with vendors and users, and most damaging of all, Ulbricht's personal journal documenting his creation and operation of the marketplace. The seizure of Ulbricht's laptop on October 1, 2013, represented far more than just the arrest of a criminal suspect. It was the capture of the central nervous system of the dark web's most sophisticated marketplace. The FBI's forensic analysis of this device would reveal the full scope of Silk Road's operations and provide unprecedented insight into how such enterprises functioned. News of Ulbricht's arrest sent shockwaves throughout both the criminal underworld and the legitimate technology community. Silk Road had been seen as virtually invulnerable, protected by layers of encryption and anonymity that seemed impenetrable to law enforcement. The fact that authorities had successfully identified, tracked, and arrested its operator demonstrated that even the most sophisticated digital criminals were not beyond the reach of determined law enforcement efforts. The immediate aftermath of the arrest saw Silk Road's operations come to an abrupt halt. Users attempting to access the marketplace found themselves unable to connect, and vendor communications went silent. The digital empire that Ulbricht had spent years building vanished overnight, leaving behind only law enforcement seizure notices and the memories of users who had participated in its illicit commerce. The legal proceedings that followed Ulbricht's arrest would become one of the most closely watched criminal cases of the digital age. On February 4, 2015, after a trial that captivated public attention and raised profound questions about internet freedom, privacy, and the limits of law enforcement authority, Ross Ulbricht was found guilty on all counts in Manhattan federal court. The jury's verdict was unambiguous. Ulbricht was responsible for creating and operating the Silk Road marketplace, and he would face the full consequences of his actions. U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara, announcing the conviction, declared that the supposed anonymity of the dark web is not a protective shield from arrest and prosecution. This statement reflected law enforcement's broader message that technological sophistication could not indefinitely protect criminal enterprises from justice. The evidence presented at trial painted a comprehensive picture of Ulbricht's criminal enterprise. Prosecutors demonstrated that he had not only created Silk Road, but had actively managed its operations, collected millions in commissions, and made decisions that affected the lives of countless individuals involved in illegal drug transactions. The government's case was built on a combination of digital evidence from his seized laptop, undercover operations conducted by federal agents, and testimony from cooperating witnesses who had been involved in Silk Road's operations. Perhaps most damaging to Ulbricht's defense were his own writings, recovered from his personal files. These journal entries provided an unprecedented window into the mind of a digital criminal, revealing his motivations, fears, and the evolution of his thinking as Silk Road grew from a small experiment into a massive criminal enterprise. In these private reflections, Ulbricht documented his philosophical justifications for the marketplace, while also acknowledging the moral complexities of facilitating drug sales. The sentencing phase of Ulbricht's case proved even more dramatic than the trial itself. On May 29, 2015, Judge Catherine Forrest sentenced Ross Ulbricht to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a decision that sparked intense debate about the appropriateness of such a severe sentence for a nonviolent first-time offender. The sentence reflected not just the scope of Ulbricht's criminal enterprise, but also the court's determination to send a strong message to others who might be tempted to follow in his footsteps. Judge Forrest's sentencing remarks were particularly pointed, addressing both the scale of Ulbricht's crimes and their broader social impact. She noted that while Ulbricht might not have personally sold drugs to users, his marketplace had facilitated countless transactions that contributed to addiction, overdoses, and other drug-related harms. The judge emphasized that Ulbricht's sophisticated use of technology to enable criminal activity, rather than mitigating his culpability, actually made his crimes more serious. The life sentence imposed on Ulbricht generated significant controversy and debate. Supporters argued that the punishment was grossly disproportionate to his crimes, pointing out that violent drug dealers and even murderers often receive shorter sentences. They contended that Ulbricht was essentially being punished for his ideas and his use of technology, rather than for traditional criminal conduct. Civil liberties advocates worried that the harsh sentence reflected judicial hostility to digital privacy and anonymous communication technologies. Critics of the sentence also pointed to Ulbricht's age and background, noting that he was a first-time offender in his 20s, who had no history of violence or traditional criminal behavior. They argued that his crimes, while serious, were fundamentally different from those typically punished with life imprisonment. The disparity between Ulbricht's sentence and those typically imposed on conventional drug dealers became a rallying point for criminal justice reform advocates. However, prosecutors and law enforcement officials defended the sentence as appropriate given the unprecedented scale of Ulbricht's criminal enterprise. They argued that Silk Road had facilitated drug sales worth hundreds of millions of dollars, potentially contributing to countless overdoses and deaths. The government's position was that the sophisticated nature of Ulbricht's crimes, rather than mitigating his culpability, actually made them more dangerous and deserving of severe punishment. The broader implications of the Silk Road case extended far beyond Ulbricht's personal fate. The successful prosecution demonstrated that law enforcement agencies were adapting to the challenges posed by sophisticated digital criminals. The techniques developed during the investigation, including methods for tracking cryptocurrency transactions and analyzing dark web communications, became templates for future investigations into similar enterprises. The case also highlighted the ongoing tension between privacy advocates and law enforcement agencies over the proper balance between digital anonymity and public safety. Supporters of strong encryption and anonymous communication tools worried that the aggressive prosecution of Ulbricht might discourage legitimate uses of these technologies, while law enforcement argued that such tools could not be allowed to provide absolute immunity for criminal activity. The Silk Road investigation and prosecution also revealed the international nature of modern digital crime and the importance of law enforcement cooperation across national boundaries. The case involved agencies from multiple countries working together to track cryptocurrency transactions, analyze server logs, and coordinate surveillance operations. This level of international cooperation represented a new paradigm in law enforcement response to global digital crime. The story of Silk Road's rise and fall continues to resonate years after Ulbricht's conviction and sentencing. The marketplace he created demonstrated both the enormous potential and the significant dangers of anonymous digital commerce. While Silk Road facilitated illegal drug sales and other criminal activities, it also showcased innovative approaches to online reputation systems, dispute resolution, and digital currency integration that would later be adopted by legitimate businesses. The technical innovations pioneered by Silk Road had lasting impacts on both criminal enterprises and legitimate commerce. The marketplace's sophisticated use of encryption, anonymous communications, and cryptocurrency transactions provided a template that was studied and emulated by both criminals and entrepreneurs. Many of the user experience features that made Silk Road successful, detailed vendor profiles, customer reviews, and integrated dispute resolution systems, became standard features of online marketplaces. The case also prompted significant soul-searching within the technology community about the dual-use nature of privacy and anonymity technologies. The same tools that protected dissidents in authoritarian regimes and preserved privacy for legitimate users also enabled sophisticated criminal enterprises like Silk Road. This tension between beneficial and harmful uses of technology remains a central challenge for developers, policymakers, and law enforcement agencies. The cultural impact of Silk Road extended far beyond its immediate criminal consequences. The marketplace became a symbol of both the promise and the peril of the digital age, representing humanity's ongoing struggle to adapt social institutions and legal frameworks to rapidly evolving technology. Ulbricht himself became a polarizing figure, viewed by some as a visionary entrepreneur and by others as a dangerous criminal who used sophisticated technology to facilitate drug dealing on an unprecedented scale. Academic researchers and policy experts continue to study the Silk Road case as an example of how digital technologies can disrupt traditional law enforcement approaches and challenge existing legal frameworks. The marketplace's operations raised fundamental questions about jurisdiction, evidence collection, and the limits of government authority in digital spaces. These issues remain relevant as new technologies continue to emerge that could enable similar criminal enterprises. The eventual fate of the Silk Road story took an unexpected turn in recent political developments. The case became a cause célèbre among certain political movements that viewed Ulbricht as a victim of government overreach rather than a criminal who deserved punishment. Advocacy groups formed to campaign for his release, arguing that his sentence was unjustly harsh and that his prosecution represented an attack on digital freedom and privacy rights. These advocacy efforts gained significant political traction, particularly among libertarian-leaning politicians and activists who saw Ulbricht's case as emblematic of broader concerns about government power and individual liberty. The campaign for his release became intertwined with debates about criminal justice reform, digital rights, and the appropriate role of government in regulating online commerce. On January 21, 2025, in one of his first acts as president following his inauguration the previous day, Donald Trump issued a full and unconditional pardon to Ross Ulbricht, commuting his life sentence and ordering his immediate release from federal prison. This dramatic development represented a stunning reversal of fortune for Ulbricht, who had spent over a decade behind bars for his role in creating and operating Silk Road. The presidential pardon of Ross Ulbricht sent shockwaves throughout the law enforcement community and prompted intense debate about the appropriate use of presidential clemency powers. Supporters of the pardon argued that Ulbricht's sentence had been grossly disproportionate to his crimes, and that his release represented a victory for criminal justice reform and digital rights. They contended that Ulbricht had already served sufficient time for his offenses and that his continued imprisonment served no legitimate purpose. Critics of the pardon, however, argued that it sent a dangerous message about accountability for sophisticated criminal enterprises and undermined law enforcement efforts to combat digital crime. They worried that pardoning Ulbricht might encourage other would-be criminals to believe that they could escape serious consequences for their actions, particularly if they could generate sufficient political support for their cases. The broader implications of Ulbricht's pardon continue to unfold as legal experts, law enforcement officials, and civil liberties advocates debate its significance. The decision represents a dramatic conclusion to one of the most significant criminal cases of the digital age. But it also raises new questions about how society should balance punishment and mercy, particularly in cases involving sophisticated technology crimes. Ida. The story of Ross Ulbricht and Silk Road serves as a cautionary tale about the double-edged nature of technological innovation. The same digital tools that promise to enhance privacy, freedom, and economic opportunity also enabled unprecedented criminal enterprises that operated beyond the reach of traditional law enforcement. Ulbricht's journey from idealistic graduate student to convicted criminal kingpin illustrates how noble intentions can lead to destructive outcomes when pursued without regard for their broader social consequences. The rise and fall of Silk Road also demonstrates the resilience and adaptability of law enforcement institutions in the face of technological challenges. The successful investigation and prosecution of Ulbricht showed that even the most sophisticated criminal enterprises could not indefinitely evade justice, provided that law enforcement agencies were willing to develop new techniques and coordinate their efforts across jurisdictional boundaries. Perhaps most importantly, the Silk Road saga highlights the ongoing tension between individual liberty and collective security in an increasingly digital world. As new technologies continue to emerge that could enable both beneficial innovations and criminal enterprises, society must grapple with fundamental questions about privacy, anonymity, and the proper balance between freedom and order. The legacy of Silk Road and Ross Ulbricht will likely continue to influence debates about digital rights, criminal justice, and the role of technology in society for years to come. Their story serves as a powerful reminder that in the digital age, the choices made by individuals can have far-reaching consequences that extend far beyond their original intentions, shaping not just their own lives, but the broader trajectory of technological and social development. As we reflect on this extraordinary tale of ambition, innovation, and ultimate downfall, we are reminded that the digital revolution, like all great transformations in human history, brings with it both tremendous opportunities and significant dangers. The challenge facing society is to harness the beneficial potential of new technologies while minimizing their capacity for harm, ensuring that the digital future we create serves the cause of human flourishing rather than destruction. The story of Silk Road ultimately transcends the particular details of one man's criminal enterprise to become a meditation on the nature of power, technology, and human nature itself. In Ross Ulbricht's Rise and Fall, we see reflected our own struggles to understand and navigate a world where the boundaries between the possible and the permissible are constantly shifting, where individual actions can have global consequences, and where the tools we create to enhance our freedom may ultimately become the instruments of our imprisonment. This is the enduring lesson of the Silk Road saga, that in our quest to build a better world through technology, we must never lose sight of the human values and social bonds that give meaning to our innovations. For in the end, it is not the sophistication of our tools, but the wisdom of our choices that will determine whether the digital age becomes a force for human liberation or a new form of bondage to our own creation. The technical architecture that Ulbricht constructed for Silk Road was, by any measure, a masterpiece of digital engineering that pushed the boundaries of what was possible with existing technology. To understand the full scope of his achievement, we must delve deeper into the intricate systems he developed to create a marketplace that could operate entirely in the shadows while maintaining the reliability and user experience of legitimate e-commerce platforms. The foundation of Silk Road's technical infrastructure rested upon three pillars: the Tor network for anonymity, Bitcoin for untraceable payments, and sophisticated server architecture designed to resist law enforcement interference. Each of these components required Ulbricht to master complex technologies that were still in their experimental phases during the early 2010s, and a successful integration of these systems demonstrated a level of technical sophistication that impressed even his adversaries in law enforcement. The Tor network, originally developed by the US Navy for protecting government communications, provided the anonymity layer that made Silk Road possible. Tor works by routing internet traffic through a series of encrypted relays, making it extremely difficult to trace communications back to their source. However, simply using Tor wasn't sufficient for Ulbricht's purposes. He needed to ensure that his marketplace could handle thousands of simultaneous users, a challenge that required him to develop custom solutions for server management, data encryption, and user authentication. Ulbricht's implementation of Bitcoin integration was particularly innovative, occurring at a time when the cryptocurrency was still largely experimental and its potential for anonymous commerce was not widely understood. He created sophisticated wallet management systems that could handle thousands of transactions while maintaining the privacy of both buyers and sellers. The technical challenge of integrating Bitcoin payments with the Tor network required solving complex problems related to network latency, transaction confirmation, and security that had never been addressed at this scale. The marketplace's user interface, while appearing deceptively simple to casual observers, represented months of careful design and programming work. Ulbricht created a system that could handle vendor registration, product listings, customer reviews, dispute resolution, and financial transactions, all while operating through the restrictive environment of the Tor network. The fact that this interface was both highly functional and relatively user-friendly demonstrated his understanding that technical sophistication alone would not ensure the marketplace's success. Beyond the core marketplace functionality, Ulbricht developed sophisticated systems for managing the human dynamics of his criminal enterprise. He created detailed vendor verification processes, reputation systems that allowed customers to rate their experiences, and dispute resolution mechanisms that could handle conflicts between buyers and sellers. These systems reflected his understanding that successful commerce, even illegal commerce, required trust and accountability mechanisms that could function in the absence of traditional legal protections. The psychological profile of Ross Ulbricht reveals a complex individual whose transformation from idealistic graduate student to criminal mastermind was driven by a potent combination of intellectual arrogance, philosophical conviction, and technological capability. Those who knew him before his involvement with Silk Road described him as thoughtful, principled, and genuinely concerned with questions of ethics and social justice. His graduate work in physics and material science had equipped him with analytical skills and a systematic approach to problem solving that would prove invaluable in constructing his digital empire. Ulbricht's philosophical development during his college years was heavily influenced by libertarian thinkers like Ludwig von Mises and Murray Rothbard, whose writings about free markets and individual liberty provided the intellectual framework for his later criminal enterprise. He became convinced that government interference in voluntary transactions between consenting adults was not only ineffective, but morally wrong. This conviction grew stronger during his graduate studies, as he witnessed what he perceived as the arbitrary exercise of institutional authority in academic and regulatory contexts. The journal entries that Ulbricht maintained throughout his operation of Silk Road provide an unprecedented window into the mind of a sophisticated criminal. These writings, which would later prove crucial evidence in his prosecution, reveal a man struggling to reconcile his criminal activities with his moral principles. He wrote extensively about the philosophical justifications for his marketplace, arguing that he was providing a valuable service by allowing people to make their own choices about drug consumption without government interference. However, these same journal entries also reveal the psychological toll that operating Silk Road took on Ulbricht. As the marketplace grew and the stakes increased, his writings became increasingly paranoid and isolated. He documented his fears about law enforcement, his concerns about the loyalty of his associates, and his growing sense that he had created something that was beyond his ability to control. The evolution of his psychological state, as revealed through these private writings, provides crucial insight into how criminal enterprises can transform their creators in ways they never anticipated. The operational challenges of running Silk Road extended far beyond the technical requirements of maintaining the marketplace. Ulbricht found himself managing a complex organization that included vendors, customer service representatives, technical support staff, and security personnel. Each of these relationships required careful management to maintain operational security while ensuring the marketplace's continued functionality. The psychological pressure of maintaining these relationships while concealing his true identity created an increasingly isolated and paranoid existence. One of the most significant challenges Ulbricht faced was managing the financial aspects of his criminal enterprise. By the time of his arrest, investigators estimated that Silk Road had generated revenues of over $183 million in Bitcoin, with Ulbricht personally collecting commissions worth approximately $18 million. Managing these enormous sums while maintaining anonymity required sophisticated money laundering techniques and careful attention to digital security. The complexity of these financial operations demonstrates the scale and sophistication of his criminal enterprise. The law enforcement investigation that ultimately brought down Silk Road represents one of the most sophisticated cybercrime investigations in history, involving multiple agencies and innovative investigative techniques that would establish precedents for future digital crime prosecutions. The complexity of the investigation reflected both the technological sophistication of Ulbricht's operation and the determination of law enforcement agencies to prove that no criminal enterprise, regardless of its technical protections, could operate with impunity. The investigation began in earnest in late 2011 when Drug Enforcement Administration agents first became aware of Silk Road through monitoring of drug-related online forums. Initial attempts to infiltrate the marketplace proved challenging, as investigators had to master the technical requirements of accessing the Tor network while maintaining their cover identities. The learning curve was steep, requiring agents to become proficient in using cryptocurrencies, anonymous communication tools, and sophisticated encryption techniques. One of the breakthrough moments in the investigation came when federal agents successfully made undercover purchases on Silk Road, providing concrete evidence of the marketplace's criminal activities. These controlled purchases required careful coordination between multiple agencies and demonstrated that the marketplace was indeed facilitating illegal drug transactions on a massive scale. The evidence gathered through these undercover operations would prove crucial in establishing the scope and nature of Silk Road's criminal activities. The technical aspects of the investigation required law enforcement agencies to develop new capabilities and expertise in digital forensics, cryptocurrency analysis, and dark web surveillance. Agents worked with academic researchers and private sector experts to develop tools and techniques for tracking Bitcoin transactions, analyzing Tor network traffic, and identifying connections between different online identities. The collaborative nature of this effort reflected the recognition that traditional law enforcement approaches were insufficient for addressing sophisticated digital crimes. International cooperation played a crucial role in the Silk Road investigation, as agents worked with counterparts in multiple countries to track servers, analyze financial transactions, and coordinate surveillance operations. The global nature of the internet meant that evidence related to Silk Road was scattered across multiple jurisdictions, requiring unprecedented levels of international law enforcement cooperation. The success of this coordination established important precedents for future investigations of transnational cybercrime. The breakthrough that ultimately led to Ulbricht's identification came through a combination of traditional investigative techniques and cutting-edge digital forensics. The connection between his Altoid username and his real identity was discovered through painstaking analysis of online forum posts and email records dating back to 2011. This discovery demonstrated that even sophisticated criminals could be undone by seemingly minor operational security failures from the early stages of their enterprises. The final months before Ulbricht's arrest were marked by increasingly desperate attempts to maintain operational security as law enforcement pressure intensified. Investigators documented his efforts to eliminate potential witnesses, secure new technical infrastructure, and adapt his operations to counter law enforcement techniques. These activities demonstrated both his awareness of the closing net and his determination to preserve his criminal enterprise at all costs. The arrest operation on October 1st, 2013, was planned with military precision, requiring careful coordination between multiple law enforcement agencies and precise timing to ensure that Ulbricht was captured while actively administering Silk Road. The choice of the Glen Park Library as the arrest location was strategic, providing agents with the ability to monitor Ulbricht's activities while maintaining the element of surprise. The successful execution of this operation demonstrated the sophistication of modern law enforcement techniques for addressing digital crime. The evidence seized during Ulbricht's arrest provided investigators with an unprecedented view into the operations of a major criminal enterprise. His laptop contained detailed records of transactions, communications with vendors and users, financial records, and most importantly, his personal journal documenting the creation and operation of Silk Road. The forensic analysis of this evidence would provide the foundation for his prosecution and reveal the full scope of his criminal activities. The trial of Ross Ulbricht became a landmark case in the intersection of technology and criminal law, raising fundamental questions about digital evidence, online identity, and the limits of anonymity in the digital age. The prosecution's case relied heavily on digital evidence, requiring prosecutors to explain complex technical concepts to a jury while establishing the connection between Ulbricht's physical identity and his online persona as Dread Pirate Roberts. The defense strategy attempted to create reasonable doubt about Ulbricht's identity as Dread Pirate Roberts, arguing that the evidence was circumstantial and that others could have been responsible for operating Silk Road. However, the overwhelming nature of the evidence, particularly Ulbricht's own journal entries and the circumstances of his arrest, made this defense extremely difficult to sustain. The trial became a showcase for the sophisticated techniques that law enforcement agencies had developed for investigating digital crimes. The cultural impact of the Silk Road case extended far beyond its immediate legal consequences, influencing discussions about privacy, technology, and individual liberty that continue to this day. The marketplace became a symbol of both the promise and the peril of digital innovation, representing the potential for technology to enable new forms of economic freedom while also creating unprecedented opportunities for criminal activity. Within the technology community, Silk Road sparked intense debates about the responsibilities of developers and entrepreneurs when creating systems that could be used for both legitimate and criminal purposes. The case highlighted the dual-use nature of many privacy and anonymity technologies, forcing technologists to grapple with the ethical implications of their innovations. These discussions became particularly relevant as privacy-focused technologies became more mainstream and accessible to general users. The academic study of Silk Road has provided valuable insights into the economics of illegal markets, the psychology of digital crime, and the effectiveness of law enforcement responses to technological innovation. Researchers have analyzed the marketplace's operations to understand how reputation systems function in illegal contexts, how pricing mechanisms operate in anonymous markets, and how technological affordances shape criminal behavior. This research has implications that extend far beyond the specific case of Silk Road to inform our understanding of digital commerce in online communities more broadly. The precedent established by Ulbricht's prosecution has influenced how law enforcement agencies approach similar cases, providing a template for investigating and prosecuting operators of dark web marketplaces. The techniques developed during the Silk Road investigation have been applied to subsequent cases involving online criminal enterprises, demonstrating the lasting impact of this pioneering investigation on law enforcement capabilities. The ongoing debates about Ulbricht's sentence and eventual pardon reflect broader societal tensions about criminal justice, the appropriate use of technology, and the balance between individual liberty and collective security. Supporters of his release argued that his sentence was disproportionate to his crimes and that his prosecution represented government overreach in the digital realm. Critics countered that his crimes had caused real harm and that lenient treatment of sophisticated criminals would encourage similar enterprises. The story of Silk Road and Ross Ulbricht continues to evolve as new technologies emerge that could enable similar criminal enterprises. The lessons learned from this case inform ongoing debates about cryptocurrency regulation, privacy technology, and the appropriate balance between innovation and security. As we move forward into an increasingly digital future, the Silk Road saga serves as both a cautionary tale and a source of insight into the complex relationships between technology, crime,